Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing the BBC and HBO adaptation of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. And then we'll be asking, whatever happened to British sci-fi and fantasy on TV? But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I've been catching up with yet another Netflix show, and this time it's Glow. Probably one of my favourites of the Netflix shows. In fact, for people who actually read the stuff we post on our website, Glow was my, I think, number one show of last year. It was helped by the fact that I caned the first two seasons last year, so it did leave a bit more of an impression on me. But yeah, I really like that show. It reminds me a bit of Orange is the New Black, only it's less punishingly depressing. It's a rare example of a premium telly show where you like all the characters and just want them to do well and want to spend time with them, and yet it still contains drama and is good, and it's not a comedy. Well, it is kind of a comedy. It's a dramedy. I don't know. It's a comedy. It's a half-hour comedy drama. So yeah, for those who don't know, it's a show very, very loosely based on a real-life show which was also called Glow, which stands for The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, and was a women's wrestling show in which a bunch of struggling actors got together to put on stupid outfits and punch each other. Basically, yeah, it's do sort of sports entertainment in the vein of WWE and so on. And yeah, it's about that and the struggles they go through, and yeah, it's really good. It's really, really funny and pleasant, and everyone in it has a nice, well-defined storyline. It's one of these shows where you start out with a couple of main characters and a lot of slightly of B characters orbiting around them, and then by the end of the first season or so, you realise that you have a certain level of affection for basically all of these B characters as well, even though the only characters who are focused on in the narrative the start are like the two or three main ones. Again, it's something similar to what Orange is the New Black did, which is perhaps one reason it slightly reminds me of it. So yeah, it's a really good show. It's one of these shows which is, I think, the embodiment of the old critical cliche. My only real criticism is that there's not enough of it. Or, the only real criticism is that I wanted more, because at 10 half-hour episodes with this huge cast, I would quite like some more.
That's a high praise indeed. So does it consistently maintain the quality across the 4 seasons that they have?
They've made 3 seasons, and they are making a 4th and annoyingly final season. On the one hand, nice that they haven't been abruptly cancelled mid-flow like some Netflix shows have. Cough, cough, the OA, cough, cough, fucking cough.
Yeah, and it's good that they will wrap up the plot, I suppose, as well, rather than just keep it spiralling on indefinitely.
It probably is, but just, as I say, because of the length of the episodes compared to the size of the cast, especially, I do feel like I just won't have spent enough time with them. But yeah, I guess it's a nice problem to have. I guess it's better this than, assuming the 4th season keeps up the quality, which I hopefully will, it's better this than they spiral into irrelevance.
That sounds good. Yeah, I haven't actually watched this show, but it's recommended a lot. I don't know anyone who doesn't like it. It seems to be everyone who watches it really, really likes this show.
For some reason, it took me a few months to watch the 3rd season. I think probably I was kind of saving it a bit because, especially because they're only half-hour episodes, I tend to burn through them quite quickly. So yeah, me and my partner did indeed watch the entire show in about a week. Probably less than that. And yeah, the plot of the 3rd season is that they're doing a Vegas show, so they're doing the same show in the same place for a long time, and they're having to live in a hotel away from their families, and it's about that. In some ways, I think it's the slightly disillusioned season because they don't get to do like ongoing storylines anymore. They just do the same show again and again and again. So yeah. But even in its what I think is probably going to be one of the darker seasons by Glow standards, it's still just very enjoyable to watch.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, sounds like a show I should watch.
It is. I haven't got round to composing my top 10 TV shows of 2019 yet, although even though the end of the year is looming like one of those scary alien monoliths in all of sci-fi. But it's probably headed for a top spot again, to be honest. I really liked it.
Cool.
Anyway, that was me. I had a good time. Alistair, what have you been consuming in the last week or two?
So I went to the cinema to see a reissue of a classic film, but it's a new cut of it. I went to see Apocalypse Now, the final cut. So Apocalypse Now is a film with an interesting history, as well as the sort of extremely chaotic way it was made. It took them a very long time to make it. There were a lot of disasters in the 1970s. There's an original cinema cut of the film, and then must be about 20 years ago or so, they released Apocalypse Now Redux, so there was like a longer cut. The Redux cut is 3 hours and 40 minutes long. It's a long film. And Francis Ford Coppola has just reissued it again, but this time it's called Apocalypse Now, the final cut. So I assume this is his last attempt to screw with his sort of mammoth creation. But yeah, it's just been released in the cinemas, the final cut. Yeah, I went to see it, and it's really good. I mean, this is not the sort of thing I say casually, but I do believe that Apocalypse Now is one of the best films ever made. It's is really good. For those who don't know, it's a sort of loose adaptation of Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness, but set in Vietnam. But also, it's a kind of broader meditation on war, the Vietnam War specifically, madness, sort of like human existence. It's kind of got everything in there. The plot is a very young Martin Sheen is a captain in the American Army, and he's sent up a river in Vietnam into Cambodia to kill Colonel Kurtz, a former American Green Beret colonel who's gone rogue and sort of set himself up with his own kingdom where these people worship him like a god, and he's a sort of horrendous, brutal, mad dictator. The Martin Sheen character, Captain Willard, is sent to kill him, and Kurtz is played by Marlon Brando. It's a sort of like incredible performance. It's kind of like defies description. And he encounters all sorts of strange people on the way. There's Robert Duvall, who's this incredibly gun-happy, explosion-happy colonel who sort of like, rides around in helicopters playing Ride of the Valkyries and blowing up Vietnamese villages. It's got like, young Harrison Ford in it, a young Lawrence Fishburne, both in kind of quite early roles. It is just an absolutely brilliant film. There's just something completely captivating about it. And I do think of the three cuts that I've seen, this one is probably the best. It's a mere 3 hours long. It's compared to the Redux cut, which is even longer. And it includes, I think, some of the best stuff from the Redux cut, but it's kind of a bit tighter and things like that. And there's some bits that I always thought didn't make sense within the Redux cut, and there's kind of the end is a bit longer, and this version's a bit sort of tighter. It includes, for example, for those who've seen various different versions, it does include like the plantation scene, which is famously not in the original cut, but it was in the Redux cut. But generally some of the later bits, the sort of second half of the film's a bit tighter, which works quite well. But there's some extra bits and pieces which are quite interesting, and also it's just phenomenal. This is a film that should be enjoyed on the big screen, so that, I don't know, the kind of weird haunting sound that the helicopters make at the beginning, or the explosions come across, and the sort of LSD vividness of it really comes across on the big screen.
I mean, I haven't seen this film, although obviously watching the shortest possible version of it does appeal to me. But it is yet another one on the probably should see that one day classics list. Yeah,
I think it's also good for anyone who's a fan of, say, The West Wing, to see a sort of like young Martin Sheen when he was young and handsome and shirtless for most of the film.
President Bartlett's in his Jugsly years.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the film is famously, sort of was chaotic to make. Like, Martin Sheen was an alcoholic when they started. He had a heart attack during the making of the film. At one point, the film opens with the Martin Sheen character sort of in a hotel room on R&R, completely drunk out of his mind, basically slowly going mad, and he punches a mirror and it shatters, and then it bleeds everywhere, and that's real blood, and that was improvised. Apparently, Martin Sheen was just drunk, and he was like, I'm just going to do a thing, and then just smashed this mirror and then started rolling around in his blood. And I think there was a bit like, is he okay? He was like, no, he's just doing a bit, man. I mean, it was the 70s. There's a brilliant documentary made by Francis Ford Coppola's wife called Hearts of Darkness. It's all about how they made the film. That's worth seeing as well.
Presumably I should see the film first.
You should probably see the film first, so we'll kind of ruin it.
Yeah, they're really putting implied limits on themselves with the final cut, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean...
Do you think they're going to do the final cut next?
I really hope not.
The Final Cut 2.
The Final Cut 2. Final Cut Redux.
I'm just thinking of all my file names.
I think that they should leave it. Francis Ford Coppola should probably leave it as it is.
I think more than 3 cuts is probably where you risk descending into self-parody.
Yeah, it's kind of like Blade Runner. There's just sort of endless different versions of Blade Runner, isn't there?
I just watched whichever version of Blade Runner you told me to be honest.
Which, for those keeping track, I think that's the director's cut.
I'm glad someone's keeping track. I certainly wasn't.
Yeah, that was it's the cut that doesn't have the voiceover, but not the more recent edits that Ridley Scott did of Blade Runner. But yeah, I think we clarified exactly which version we were watching when we did it on the podcast, because with Blade Runner, there's always a kind of like, well, which version is it? Because there's so many different ones. Well, there's 3 different ones. Yeah, if you're a fan of the film, the final cut, I think, for my money, is the best cut, because it's got the good stuff from the Redux cut, but is a bit shorter and a bit tighter, which is good. And if you're just a fan of the film, I highly recommend just taking this opportunity to see it on the big screen, which is a rare opportunity, and it is really, really good.
So if I were to want to have my first ever Apocalypse Now experience, you'd say go for this final cut?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Fair enough.
It's the best. It's the best of the three cuts, even though it is 3 hours long. I think it is long. It's definitely longer than the original cinema cut of the film, but it's got loads of extra really good stuff. Yeah, for example, like especially having the plantation scene, because the plantation scene, there's a bit in the film after they leave the sort of American-controlled area of Vietnam, before they meet Kurtz, when they stumble across a French plantation that's still desperately fighting the war in Vietnam that preceded the American-Vietnamese War, which was the war between the French colony and the Vietnamese, and they're still fighting that war. And it's kind of it's a really good scene because it's kind of one of the sort of druggier, sort of weirder bits of the film, and also it's really kind of adds some of the history to Vietnam and like kind of fleshes out a bit more. That it goes like makes the point that the Vietnamese War, from the Vietnamese point of view, the American War was just the end of a 1,000-year-long war they've been fighting for a very long time. America assumed it was all about them, but it kind of fills in the fact that from the Vietnamese point of view, yeah, what we call the war in Vietnam is just the tail end of extremely long conflict. So it's got that scene, and that scene's really good and stuff, but it's a bit tighter, so I recommend the final cut.
Okay, and our main review type feature today, we're covering the new BBC adaptation of His Dark Materials, which is of course based on the book trilogy by Philip Pullman, which consists of, let's see if I can do this in one take, Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Golden Compass. I think Northern Lights...
Sorry?
No, I missed it, damn it. Second take, which consists of Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, The Amber Spyglass, although The Northern Lights was, I believe, released in America. Do we still have any American listeners? Who knows? As The Golden Compass, and that was, of course, also the title of the unsuccessful first film adaptation, I think 10, 15 years ago now, with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. But now we're back, as everything is going from film to TV, with a BBC HBO co-production featuring James McAvoy, Ruth Wilson, and Daphne Keane from Logan as Lyra, and written by Jack Thorne. So we have seen, I believe, the first 2 episodes. So for the first time in a while in Modern Fantasy Violence, we're actually going to be anti-spoiling, because we will not be able to talk about the most recent one because we haven't seen it. But still, yes, we may spoil the first 2 episodes for you a bit. Spoiler warning, I guess. So with that in mind, Alistair, what did you think?
I think this is a good adaptation of the book. I really loved these books. I read them when I must have been 17, 18, so shortly after they came out, and they really did make like a big impression on me. They're just like a phenomenal piece of writing. The books are very dear to me, so I felt obviously quite sort of protective of them when they've been adapted, and also I really couldn't stand the aforementioned Daniel Craig, Nicole Kidman version where they just like absolutely butchered the first book. Is in like the wrong order. Like, they switched like the second and third acts around, which is like... But anyway, we're not going to review that film. But this version I really like. I thought it's faithful to the book, but not in a sort of slavish way. It's kind of clearly its own thing, but obviously very heavily a clear adaptation of the novels, which is good. The world they've created, the world of the sort of alternative version of Oxford, where people have demons and their sort of magic seems like a more potent force in this alternative Oxford, and it's different in several other ways, which is so sort of rich and immersing in the novel. You really get into this world, and I feel they have sort of brought it to life. There is, this sense of a world that is close to ours, but also like very different. They've kind of managed to capture, which I really like. The other thing I like about it is that they've kept the fact that the main villain is the church. Which I think the previous film version shied away from because they didn't want to cause as much controversy, I think. But yeah, I like the fact that the villains are clearly like the church. And the church is like a sort of tyrannical, oppressive, totalitarian organisation in this universe. So far, I've been enjoying it.
I, to be honest, haven't massively been. I think it's sort of low-end okay. I feel slightly harsh saying it's bad, but for a fantasy adaptation, I'm finding it a bit sort of flat and unmagical. I do agree they've done a decent job of sort of capturing the world visually and making it actually seem sumptuous and there. And I like the fact that, as you say, they've more or less stuck to the original intent of the book, rather than dicking around with it too extensively. But I'm not sure I actually like many of the decisions they've made in dramatising it. I'm not sure why they've made the decision to cut away from Lyra to dull people talking quite so often. It feels like they really want to be Game of Thrones in a slightly annoying way. I haven't read the books for a few years. To be honest, I've read them recently enough, but I probably should remember them. I read the books about 3 years ago, and the first book sticks pretty closely to Lyra's point of view, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a reasonably close book in her perspective.
Yeah.
The decision they've made to jump around a bit more, I don't know. I'm not sure... I mean, I get they've got a world to build, I guess, and they can't just have Lyman monologuing. So I guess you got to do what you got to do, but I'm not sure I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, are you sort of referring to like the bit with the Egyptians and their sort of quest to find where the children are disappearing?
I mean, that's not the worst part. The worst part is the endless cuts away to, well, the seemingly endless cuts away to random people talking about the church's machinations. Those are the parts that really make me just want to cry. But yeah.
Yeah, because I guess in the book that's you kind of get that conveyed through, I don't know, I guess like Lyra's internal monologue, or there's another way of they get that information across that you kind of find out about the church and the magisterium, and they're based in Geneva and things like that. Yeah, I don't know if there might be an issue with the fact that it's like early and they need to set these things up, and then when the plot gets moving, once you've got all these moving pieces in your head, they can do more with them. But I mean, I guess it's part of bringing the world to life, is the kind of the broader politics of it are like important to the plot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how it could be handled better.
Yeah, I'm just not sure it's doing Lyra that many favours to be constantly cut away from songs. Like, I liked Daphne Keane quite a lot in Logan, but I'm not sure she's coming across quite as strongly in this, because I don't really feel like she's getting that much material beyond the stuff that just kind of advances the plot.
Yeah, I mean, she's not the sort of person I'm sort of most riveted by. I do think that James McAvoy and Ruth Wilson are very good in these roles, especially as in the book you get such a strong sense of, like, I don't know, these characters. I guess partly because it's written from the point of view of Lyra, who's a child, and then when they meet these kind of impressive adults like Lord Asriel, Mrs. Coulter, they kind of like, their power is almost like perceptible to her. But I guess it's that way that children can kind of be sort of awestruck by adults, because I don't know, there's something about being a grown-up, has like kind of so much, I don't know, power and significance to a child, which you kind of comes across really well in the book. You get these sense of these larger than life figures. But I do think that James McAvoy and Ruth Wilson are good in the parts.
I would agree with you there, yeah. I do like those two in those parts. I think I have some issues about how they're handling Mrs. Coulter's storyline, which I will get to, but I do think those two are doing good work.
Yeah, but Daphne Keane's all right as Lyra. I mean, she's had some good scenes. I think in the most recent episode, like there's the bit which is in the book when she has to sort of sneak into Mrs. Coulter's study, was quite tense. And I really did buy into her friendship with Roger, the boy who gets sort of grabbed by the gobblers, which is sort of key to the whole thing.
Yeah, maybe I'm just came in with too high expectations of her after remembering she was really good in Logan. But I was expecting her to be, a really riveting child lead, as child leads go, and she's an alright child lead. If I didn't have those expectations from Logan, I'm not sure I'd have come away thinking anything much about her at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is where you got these expectations, because she was very good in Logan. But yeah, I think maybe it's the fact that the focus moves away from her to the Egyptians and things like that. I mean, the Egyptian plotline, I guess, is important to establish the gobblers, and it is, it's something in the book that comes across really well. This sense of kind of fear that like children are disappearing and no one will talk about it. Though I did feel that like the book really got going, and I suppose this is like, if you've not read the book, so I guess this will be a spoiler for the TV show. What's likely to happen in the next episode or so?
Just keep it vague. It'll be fine.
I really thought that like kind of when some of the main plot lines link up, it's when it really gets going, and when Lyra kind of really starts on her journey, which has only really begun. And based on the book and the kind of next time on His Dark Materials, I get the sense they're going to hit that. Like, the book opens well, but when it kind of gets to the quest is when it really gets going, and that's probably the next episode.
Yeah, hopefully. I did spend a lot of the second episode also kind of going, okay, come on, leave the flat, do something, come on. Somebody do something.
Well, the book's called Northern Lights, and it really gets going when they go to the north.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the bits where Lyra links up with the Egyptians and they meet Lee Scoresby and the witches and the bears and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
That's the sort of thing you're after.
Yeah, and it's clearly coming soon, especially as I remember what happens in the book. I suppose, again, the second episode is really establishing Mrs. Coulter and the General Oblation Board.
Yeah, that's a change, isn't it? They didn't spill that the Gobblers are the General Oblation Board this early in the book.
Yeah, one of the things is that they're moving through some of the twists faster than the book does.
Yeah, the bloke coming to our world has been spilled pretty early.
Yeah, well, that's in the second book.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's come early, and they've revealed that. Have they revealed that Mrs. Coulter is evil a lot earlier?
Yeah, they have, and also that she's in charge of the Gobblers. They've revealed that earlier, and also they've revealed that Lord Asriel is Lyra's father earlier. It takes a while for them to get to that in the book.
Yeah, some of those I can sort of see why they might have done it, but the Mrs. Coulter storyline feels really weird to me. Even though I like Ruth Wilson and I think she's doing a good job with what she's got, I don't know, there's a bit at the end of the second episode where Lyra is in the streets feeling sad because everything's gone wrong, and her relationship with Mrs. Coulter has failed. I'm like, this would have much more impact on me if Mrs. Coulter hadn't been obviously evil from about 10 seconds after you met her.
Yeah, in the book, again, like, they do this sense of creating this kind of like larger than life presence that adults have. But I think we said before, it's easier to be ambiguous in books, whereas like I guess Ruth Wilson needs to play the character as either like really nice or not. I suppose it's a difficult decision to make.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I do enjoy James McAvoy. He's really operating at a sort of higher classic level of melodrama, which I appreciate, especially as I feel some of this show is a bit lacking in like life and spark. Like I don't feel like it really comes alive some of the time. But James McAvoy is definitely fully conscious.
He comes across again as this kind of like this like titanic figure, considering he's the man who wants to leave an army in a war against God. You've kind of really got to sell the kind of megalomania of him. Yeah, it's like as if it's like you start out, he's a man who wants to like blow a hole in the sky to go to another world. You think like, wow, that's a tall ambition.
That's ambitious, yes.
Yeah. One of the things I have enjoyed actually is that the fact that they're bringing in stuff from book 2 early on, which partly is how the show is kind of makes it more of a thing of its own right and less a straight, like ultra faithful adaptation. And also because so much of the arc of all 3 books is about interdimensional travel and all these different worlds, it makes sense to actually introduce that theme earlier on. So it's more present in the story, I guess. Yeah, the character who travels to our world is a character who's in the first book, but we only discover later that, there's a portal between worlds that character uses.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, I guess when you're adapting a book that realistically a large percentage of the audience have probably read, or at least are aware of the plot to, I guess you might want to try and mess around with it a bit to try and create surprises or something. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be hard to tell, I guess. We'll find out in a year or 3 when they've made the second season. Apparently they have commissioned the second series already to try and make it before Daphne Keane gets too distractingly old. So I guess we'll be finding out one way or another.
Yeah, that was one thing I was worried about, is that like if they're going to do, well, I guess like 4 seasons, probably 4 seasons would cover the plot of the 3 books, considering the third book, The Amber Spyglass, is longer than The Subtle Knife and Northern Lights put together. I don't know if there was an element of J.K. Rowling-itis or whatever, which is the reason why it's so long, is that after 2 hit books, the editors lost their ability to stand up to Philip Pullman. There's also a lot more happens in the third book. So yeah, I think 4 series could cover it nicely, but I suppose that there's a difference between how someone looks between 14 and 18 or whatever, so it might be distracting.
I can't actually remember how much time is meant to have passed in story, to be honest. So she is, I suppose, allowed to realistically age.
I don't know, yeah, it did surprise me that they brought in like kind of the interdimensional travel stuff earlier, which is one of my favourite aspects of the books, actually. It was quite good to see that. And you really get the contrast of how different Lyra's world is when it's, like literally presented next to our world. Or, a very close version of our world.
I kind of maybe wish I'd had more sort of outdoor shots of Lyra's world, to be honest. I mean, obviously this is, I'm assuming the reason for this is money, money, money. But I felt like the contrast between our world and Lyra's world would have been better pitched if for the fact that we've only had a few, like, nighttime exterior shots of Lyra's world. Whereas as soon as that bloke comes to our world, it's like, oh, look, the streets in daytime.
Yeah, it's kind of odd to see, like, the kind of, the bus to central Oxford. It's quite incongruous.
Yeah, but yeah, I just felt like the contrast would work more if we'd seen a bit more of Lyra's world. I mean, again, I guess the reason is money, but it felt like the first episode was very tightly contained in the college, and the second episode was very, very tightly contained in that flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that is what's bugging me about it. Maybe I feel like it should have more of an epic sprawl, and it seems to be quite a lot of Lyra getting stuck in rooms.
Well, that's what I guess people remember from the We Should Drink every time I basically compare this adaptation directly to the book.
It's fine. It's revenge for the hundreds of times I've done this when we've reviewed comic adaptations.
Yeah, but also it's the fact that, like, I literally opened by saying, like, I like this because it's a thing in its own right, and now I'm like, well, the thing about the book is... But yeah, the thing about the book is it's kind of, people remember from it is this epic journey across the frozen north, which is why I guess if you remember that, and then in the first 2 episodes mainly take place in small rooms, you basically be like, I can see this element of like, well, what's going on here? And I guess maybe they'll sort that when they get to, in the next few episodes, when we get to an epic travel across the frozen north with balloons and bears and things like that.
Yeah, I am assuming they are saving their money somewhat for when they have to animate a bear.
Yeah. CGI bear.
But yeah, the demons are nicely done. I'm enjoying those.
Yep, they're cool.
I find some of the dialogue a bit leaden and CBBC at times. I don't know if this is a criticism or just a remark, but maybe I'm on the older end of the audience for this show.
It is an odd one. I'm not really sure how they're pitching it. Because I read recently Philip Pullman's new novel set in the world of the world of his Dark Materials, The Secret Commonwealth, and that is very much a book aimed at grown-ups. Like, it's got like sex and also sexual violence in it. It's like,
I haven't read that one, but I've read the one before it. There's some sexual assault in it, so yeah.
Yeah, and there's more in the second one. So yeah, like at first I was a bit like, well, this is definitely not for kids anymore. But I guess because it started out as like a young adult book and became like just a book, which I know is a sort of disparaging thing people say about young adult literature that fans of young adult literature really don't like. But yeah, it did on some level escape the young adult ghetto. And then is it an element of like, well, it's a book that everyone likes, so we should make a TV adaptation aimed at grown-ups? Or is it supposed to be enjoyed by someone who's the same age as Lyra?
Well, the dialogue kind of reads that way, but on the other hand, the long, boring scenes of people talking in church robes really don't. So,
yeah,
who knows? Do they know?
Yeah, well, that is probably a flaw in the whole enterprise. One criticism I've seen from the Twitters, going back to the demons, is, which I've seen a few people say, especially on Twitter, is they're saying there's not enough demons. I think, although yes, I don't know. There are scenes when you see people in the background and basically they're just people standing there in costumes and they don't have demons. And it's basically, it's a bit like, well, does everyone have like a mouse demon that's hidden in their pocket? And I kind of see what people say, like it would really highlight how different the world is if there was just kind of like demons like coming out like the wall all the time. But partly I think it's like the BBC does have less money than Game of Thrones did. And if they've saved their money to make the bear look half decent and the ballooning bit look half decent, then I'm probably all right with that. And it's, yeah, and CGI is expensive, and especially CGI for like the background. And also I've seen people say like, why can't people just bring in their pets? And I think this is a terrible idea because like animals have to be like trained to appear in films. You can't just like bring your cat onto set and expect it to like behave and not just like cause a massive ruckus. And you know, you need special, if you want to use real animals, you're going to need lots of trained like stage animals, which also cost money. And also the other thing is like, it's got to look daft if like 90% of the people in Lyra's world have like, you know, have like a Scotty dog demon. It's just going to look silly. There's just going to be a lot of quite boring dogs everywhere.
Yeah,
Which is also the fact that what's great about the book is that like everyone's got like a demon that like reflects their life. And their personality. So lots of people have like exotic birds or like different. Like I don't think I'd even heard of a pine marten before Pan changes into one in the book. Maybe they're like a North American thing. Probably are. Yeah, I just think it would kind of ruin it if like he's like the 8 millionth person with a terrier demon.
Yeah. Here's my cat. What does your cat look like? We've reimagined his Dark Materials as a world where everyone has a different coloured cat.
Yeah.
His cat materials, we call it.
His cat materials inevitably gets shredded when the cat's sharpening its claws, regardless of how many times you tell them not to do it.
Yeah, his dark meow cereals.
Oh, it's even worse.
I feel like we're losing it.
I think the review has concluded if we're making terrible cat puns.
I'm feeling good.
Oh.
It's over. Gotta play a jingle now. Okay, and for our follow-up question, we are going to ask, whatever happened to British sci-fi fantasy on TV? And now often when podcasters ask this, you might think we're going to launch into a wave of nostalgia for, I don't know, Thunderbirds?
Quatermaster?
Yeah, all sorts of stuff. But to be honest, I'm mostly going to launch into a wave of nostalgia for the early 2000s to early 2010s, when Doctor Who came back on, and suddenly we had a splurge of entertaining, quirky British sci-fi fantasy like Merlin and Misfits and Being Human, and probably some other worse ones that didn't stick with me. And yeah, they all happened. They reveal in an alarmingly short period of time. And in the last 5 to 10 years, it feels like we've had hardly any. Alistair, what happened?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My main note actually I have, is obviously like, well, Doctor Who has sort of just dominated British sci-fi probably since like the 60s. But even that, I felt that like Doctor Who seemed to be like more of like a big deal a few Doctors ago. I guess the thing with Doctor Who is that like each Doctor is almost like a show in its own right. So, which is why they say the Matt Smith Doctor Who can be like incredibly popular, and now the Jodie Whittaker Doctor Who, although is good, it's very good. It's more, well, I enjoyed it. It's more seems like a kind of a niche product aimed at like kind of fans. You know, it's more of like, seems like more like a cult show rather than like a really like popular show. But yeah, I think the Return of Doctor Who, as you said, like kickstarted a sort of mini revolution. It was like, oh, we can do British sci-fi now, in that like there was a few things happening at the same time. Doctor Who boosted everyone's confidence. CGI had clearly got cheap enough that the BBC could afford it, which I think was an important factor, that like now you could do at least some sort of space stuff and some kind of aliens and monsters and things, and it not look like laughably shit, which I think kind of gave people also like allow people to experiment more. And there was this like sort of wave of British sci-fi, including The Fades, which I think is underappreciated classic.
Yeah, that died after 1 year, didn't it? But yeah, I do remember a lot of people telling me that was really good, and I should have watched it.
Yeah.
I didn't.
It was
yeah.
good. It ends on a cliffhanger, annoyingly. Which is, like everything that gets cancelled, it has to end on a terrible, really annoying cliffhanger. Yeah, but then again, I mean, also I felt that, like, as well as, kind of like 10, 15 years ago when Doctor Who came back, but also before that, like, kind of in like the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of great British sci-fi, Blake Seven, Threads, Quatermaster, sorry, I keep saying it wrong, that I've mentioned, and there was this, whereas all that kind of lovable, I don't know, like, some of those shows are clearly made for not very much money, but they are really, really entertaining, or like classic Doctor Who, that, although some of them are a bit naff, there are ones that are like Genesis of the Daleks, which is made for basically nothing, but still is really tense.
Well, yeah, I think partly we seem to have lost the will to watch things that look really shit and just go with it.
Game of Thrones is probably responsible for that.
Yeah, I guess so. A show which
did look good.
I don't think goes on the British sci-fi list, despite being filmed in Ireland and featuring a fuck ton of British actors. I guess mostly because it's written by an American author and made by an American company. I think it is the fault of American shows turning out and doing annoyingly good special effects on a TV budget, which, as you say, then means the BBC, who, for whatever reason, still seem to be shouldered with the burden of actually making a lot of the British sci-fi shows. I don't know why. You'd think it would be the big commercial companies who could make some sort of big, risky investment, but in actual fact, the commercial channels just make incredibly obvious, safe bullshit.
Yeah, I think maybe because they don't want to risk the budget for sci-fi when they can make yet another cop show that people will watch.
Yeah, probably. As you say, Doctor Who's Imperial phase, to bring back a term, was clearly mid to late David Tennant and early Matt Smith.
Yeah.
That was the point where Doctor Who was the king, and in a sort of rising tide lifts all ship type way, it seemed to bring with it this sort of wave of other sci-fi fantasy shows.
Yeah. That was the time when people who weren't, I don't know, sci-fi fantasy geeks like me watched Doctor Who and watched shows like Being Human and Misfits and things like that. Yeah, you didn't have to be, like me, someone who reads science fiction novels and watches obscure sci-fi shows on Netflix to be watching kind of like Doctor Who and things like that. But now it feels like it's Doctor Who has retreated back into the geek sphere rather than just the sphere.
Yeah, and especially due to, I guess, the scale of the budget needed to make a British sci-fi fantasy show that looks good. If you're only making it for a small niche audience, it's probably just not justifiable. I mean, I guess that's possibly why. I mean, I was going to say a lot of these shows didn't last that long, but, Merlin, the big ones, like Merlin, Misfits and Being Human, all ran for 5 years? 4 or 5 years?
Some of them longer.
I mean, you do hit the British show problem in, but British shows can't really afford to maintain their actors for very long, it seems. Rather than American shows that are just willing to lock actors in for years and years and then throw money at them to make them stay more.
Yeah.
The average British show appears to have to get its actors for about 3 years maximum. That is, in my experience, if you're following a British TV show, after 3 years, that's when the cast start vacating.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Doctor Who, I guess, is the ultimate British show, because obviously it's got its self-cleansing, ditch the cast after 3 years gimmick built in.
Yeah.
Whereas shows like Misfits and Being Human, in fact, Misfits and Being Human are pretty big examples of this, had a very tangible, it's been 3 years, all the characters I like have left. Well, shit.
Spooks was another one, although it's not a sci-fi show. Every 3 years, basically, they killed off pretty much the main characters and brought up a new crop.
Well, yeah, Spooks, somewhat cleverly, brought in anything could happen, people can die vibe quite early, which meant that they survived the 3-year cull a lot better than some shows. Like, that show went for, 10 seasons?
Yeah.
I mean, Spooks was borderline sci-fi by the end, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they don't even make that anymore. I mean, as that as a sort of action genre show has fucked off.
Yeah, partly I think one of the things about British sci-fi is that it just doesn't seem to be a thing we do as a nation. I don't know, I mean, it doesn't seem to other than Doctor Who, which is kind of Doctor Who has felt, I think the nation treats as its eccentric uncle, that is we sort of the British psyche seems to tolerate the fact that it's known for this slightly mad, slightly camp, slightly silly show that is against all probability is really popular. But it's it doesn't seem to be part of our national psyche. What we seem to think that we do as a country is crime shows and historical shows or historical dramas. That seems to be what we feel I don't know, it's because is it because so many great crime writers and Agatha Christie being the example are British. We feel and I don't know, the kind of the British drawing room murder is famous to the point that it's gone beyond parody. We started this year by talking about is Luther, which, again, very, very popular British show, just an update on the kind of British, kind of murder show that's been, popular since they've been doing British TV, and obviously in the novel form popular before that. So, and also we do a lot of historical dramas. Again, Britain's got quite a long history, so they like to dive into its past. And the other thing, I guess, that the BBC does is literary adaptations. They're always like taking books down, famous books down from the shelves. To do new adaptations, it seems to be a thing that the BBC feels the need. Partly, I guess, partly its brief is to educate and inform. I guess it feels the need to educate people about the canon of English literature by adapting it continuously forever.
I mean, I know it's part of the ongoing nature of our culture, but I'm getting a bit weary of the number of adaptations, to be honest. Like, we have had a tiny mini resurgence of British sci-fi this year, insofar as they've made both His Dark Materials and Good Omens.
Yeah.
Both of which are BBC co-productions with the big American companies. Like, His Dark Materials is part made by HBO, Good Omens is Amazon.
And also there's the BBC adaptation of War of the Worlds, which starts this Sunday directly after His Dark Materials.
Yeah, and I believe that Stephen Moffat's Dracula's starting soon, which is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, War of the Worlds, Dracula, and also to a degree His Dark Materials also kind of fall under the British BBC literary adaptation. You could argue that, like, it's part of, again, the BBC's remit to adapt the canon of English literature is one of the reasons why they're doing His Dark Materials. It's just a recent addition to the canon that happens to be a sort of sci-fi fantasy thing. It fits more into that tradition than into the tradition of British science fiction, which is different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it's part of what we're doing at the moment as a culture is adapting stuff, forever adapting stuff. But yeah, I'm a little tired of it, to be honest. I just want a show about some people with superpowers living in a house. Come on.
Yeah.
I just want some silly sci-fi premise where people can have some fun. I don't really know the ending.
Well, there's the Umbrella Academy, although that's an adaptation.
Also not very British at all.
Oh, yeah, okay, so that's a terrible example. Apology. Yeah, I just think it's not seems to be a thing we seem to do as a culture, other than like Doctor Who and things that Doctor Who inspires, like everything from Blake Seven to Being Human. There's also Red Dwarf.
Yeah, again, has its waxes and wanes. I don't know. I mean, as you say, maybe one day Doctor Who will have another moment. It'll get another combination of writer and doctor that clicks and has its massive splash of success, and then the imitators will spring up and we'll have another good few years. It was just fun to actually have a crop of current culty shows for Britain that are actually good. I mean I guess the thing is, it's not as if the world is short of high concept sci-fi shows being crapped out, is it? I mean, thanks to the world of peak content, they're everywhere.
I mean, I've just finished watching, or nearly finished watching, Another Life, which is a kind of average to good sci-fi, space-based sci-fi show. And I was thinking, like, I don't know, do we need the British take on this? A kind of an average show about people in a spaceship going to an alien planet? I mean, it doesn't seem like the world's crying out for more average science fiction.
I know, but that's kind of why I like things like Merlin Being Human, to be honest. I mean, Being Human, I know it was the American version of Being Human, which I have not seen. But if we're going to bother making British sci-fi fantasy, I would quite like it if we could at least make it about Britain in the way that it's different from America to justify existing in the first place. I'm not in any way possessed of national pride, but it's nice to see your lifestyle in some way represented on TV. It's just fun to see people who live in roughly the same way you live, instead of having to slightly transpose your day-to-day life onto Americans.
Certainly, yeah, I completely agree with that. You want to see yourself represented on screen to some degree, yeah. Why do the aliens always seem to land in, land in New York? Can't they? Yeah, can't they land in Sheffield?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there are not millions of pounds available in the BBC budget for me to realise my dream of plant-based aliens growing in Chelmsford, but...
Yeah, the Day of the Triffids adaptation based in Chelmsford.
Yeah.
Could be quite good, actually.
Spoken like someone who has not spent very much time in Chelmsford. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a lot of this is nostalgia. I mean, maybe this isn't really in-depth cultural analysis. Maybe it's just me going, I missed the thing. But it just seems like a shame that for a few minutes it was happening, and now it's definitely not happening again.
I did just sort of spend a little bit of time dissing the genre that I love and also seek to be a luminary of and professional author in, so apologies sci-fi fans for that. But to say something positive about it, but also to sort of answer the question, is that there is some really great sci-fi out there, TV sci-fi that's been done, and for some reason it's just not been done in Britain. Like, we don't have a show like Dark, for example. Dark's one of the best sci-fi shows I've seen in a long time. Or The Returned, the French sort of zombie show, sort of sci-fi. Again, like, a really, really good TV show. Like, there's no British Dark out there right now. There's no British The Returned. Like, In the Flesh, for example, was a British zombie show that was really good, and I think really do something original with zombies. But yeah, it finished and there doesn't seem to be anything similar to it. And I know there's, like, again, we do endless drawing room murders because they're cheaper, but to be honest, there's not that much like CGI needed for Dark, or for Russian Doll, for example, that also like came out this year. Those shows, they're just good writing with good sci-fi premises. There is great sci-fi going on TV. it's just not happening in Britain, which seems a bit odd.
Yeah, I don't know. Whenever the BBC get the money together to do some sci-fi, they always seem to think, right, we're going to have to make this, broad, family-friendly stuff, so we try and get as many viewers as possible to justify spending the money, which obviously the BBC must do battle with the Tory government to explain why they spend every penny they spend. But yeah, it is a shame. It does mean they probably can't make something weird and niche with it.
Yeah, something like Russian Doll, which doesn't have broad appeal, but is a great show. And ironically, by being a more sort of niche thing, it really struck a chord. I guess it struck a chord with, say, people who write TV reviews and are active on Twitter, which is a way you can create a niche thing to become a popular thing. But yeah, just a great show with some great performances, really captured people's imagination for like a week, and was briefly like the biggest thing in the world. Or at least seemed like the biggest thing in the world from my perspective. To be honest, like 99% of the people did not care.
Yeah, we didn't cover it on the podcast, guys, but watch Russian Doll, it was good.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be discussing it when we do our wrap-up of the year.
Yeah, mentioning my top 10 TV for the second time this episode, yeah, that's probably going to be on it as well.
Yeah.
Been a good year for TV. But anyway, we'll save that for the actual wrap-up.
Yeah, but again, I was looking at it last night, my list of best stuff and this year, and there's a lot of sci-fi on it, and none of it is really British. I guess there's only one episode of Doctor Who this year. It doesn't seem to be our national character, or when it is, like, it has to fit into something else we do, like literary adaptations or Doctor Who, basically, things we do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to remember what the last really good, inspiring bit of British culture I watched was. Kind of feels like we're a bit depressed at the moment and not really that inspired.
It's almost like there's a giant shadow hovering over our culture and national psyche that's making everyone timid and
sad,
afraid and sad, and not optimistic about the future, which a lot of science fiction tends to be. And we're also kind of sick of dystopias because we've had too many of those, and the world, to be honest, is quite dystopian. They say as I just stare out the window at like an endless grey sky.
I would say I'm surprised this turned into bleak existential angst, but to be honest, I did actually expect it.
No, fair enough. I don't know. Maybe there'll be a decent series of Doctor Who next year. Or maybe the War of the Worlds will be really good.
Hope so. God, I hope so. Well, I'm done.
Yep. I'm just off to kill myself, but
yeah, sure, why not?
Probably should record the outro first.
Okay, let's record the outro, then kill ourselves, that'll do.
Cool, yeah, suicide's something I do in my own time, not on the podcast's time.
Well, at least it would give you an angle that might get you onto the front page of BBC News. He killed himself and recorded it on his podcast.
That's all we have time for in this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please leave us a review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want still more content, except in smaller doses, you can go to our social media at MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook and listen to us tell you that week's episode is running late. As this one might, to be honest, as I have quite a lot of stuff to do this weekend, but I'm meant to be editing it, but we'll see. Maybe you're listening to it on time, maybe you're not. At this point in the episode, you probably know. Anyway, I've been Nick Bryan, and when I'm not talking about podcasts or redecorating houses, I am on Twitter at NickMB or on my website at nickbryan.com, where you can find out more about the comics and stuff that I write. Thank you.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us in 2 weeks on this podcast, where we will be reviewing Martin Scorsese's new Netflix film, The Irishman. Until then, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Is like his dog materials, I guess, would be the alternative. Yeah.
I think we killed it.